Top story tonight, reaction. Joining us from Washington, Raymond Arroyo, managing editor of EWTN News, a Catholic news service. And Jim Wallis, the president of Sojourners, a national Christian group committed to faith and action for social justice. So where am I making my mistakes, Mr. Wallis?
Happy New Year, Bill.
Same to you.
Great place to start the year with a story on Pope Francis. The Pope is calling us not to an ideology. He's calling us to the way of Jesus, as his words that you had him speak to us. He's the vicar of Christ. And as a Catholic and as one who knows the Bible, you know what the Gospel of Matthew 25 says, that how we treat the least of these, the hungry, the naked, the sick, the stranger, those who are locked up in jail, is how we treat Christ himself. This is the core of the gospel. So today, just today, it was released, the Pope had a meeting with all the heads of all the orders, and he called priests around the world to get out of their comfort zones and serve the poor. He says, this is very important to me. We've got to be with those on the margins, or else we'll become abstract ideologists and fundamentalists, which is, he said, a mistake. How do we get with the poor? That's what the Pope is calling us all to, not ideology, but the core of the gospel of Christ.
All right, but the difference here is politics versus theory, okay? Theoretically, every Christian is going to help the poor, all right? In reality, not every Christian does. But my contention, Mr. Arroyo, is that capitalism does the most good for the poor, because it provides opportunity for poor people who will seize it, okay? As I said, some will not. And I don't believe that it is the obligation of a Christian or anybody else, okay, to give their money and resources to people who are self-destructive. Am I wrong, Mr. Arroyo?
Well, the Pope is not asking anybody to do that, Bill. And this is the misreading of this document. This all comes from that exhortation a few weeks ago, at the end of November, called The Joy of the Gospel. It is a spiritual document where the Pope is calling each of us to actively get engaged, to help those nearest us.
And, okay, but we all agree that's a good thing. But the left, as I said, have co-opted the words of the Pope to try to push a nanny state and to say capitalism is wrong. You've got to break it all down and give. But, Mr. Arroyo, Jesus said to his apostles, you give up everything and follow me. And a rich man walked away. You know that. Yes. So there is an interpretation from some people that Jesus says, hey, it's wrong to be rich. You give it up and you follow me.
Well, here's what the Pope is saying. And in that document, he warns about this welfare mentality, Bill. And for all the coverage we've been hearing about the Pope's a socialist, he's calling us to this or that, he also warns about a welfare mentality that can set in if the government becomes the means of charity. He wants you and I to be the charitable giver.
Right, and
he doesn't want the government. He doesn't want the government to be.
How do you respond to that, Mr. Wallis? That the Pope is basically saying that individuals should help the poor, and obviously we should if we buy into the Judeo-Christian philosophy. Okay, but he's not saying that the government should impose this vast nanny state.
He's also saying in the joy of the gospel that the wealthy, those who have benefited so much, have a particular responsibility to help and serve the poor and be generous. He's saying
but that's fine. But you don't force them to do it. It's a matter of voluntary, which is what I think Pope Francis is saying. Voluntarily you do it. You don't force them.
But Catholic social teaching talks about the common good and talks to all of us investing in those who are the least of these. And he says about the market, he challenges the trickle-down economy, saying that will necessarily help the poor. What he's saying is that this system of capitalism, when it's devoid of values, it really can degenerate. And he's saying capitalism needs values that it doesn't create virtues outside of itself.
Let's deal with reality, Mr. Wallis. The reason that this country is the wealthiest country, most powerful country, and the most compassionate, gives the most money away, is because of capitalism. And in capitalism, there are abuses, okay? That people get greedy and they do bad things. But if you bust down the capitalistic system, you're not only going to hurt the poor, who are not going to have as many opportunities, but you're going to hurt everybody. How do you reply to that, Mr. Arroyo?
Look, I think Jim would agree. Capitalism has floated an awful lot of boats. If you look at East Asia, if you look at the middle class that's grown in China, in India, that's largely because of capitalism. What all the popes have warned about, Bill, from John Paul to Benedict to this pope, is unregulated capitalism that focuses only on profit without considering the human person and the dignity
You got to
of that
have a
person.
moral
That's what this is all
responsibility
about.
attached to it. All right, Mr. Wallis, last word.
You've got to humanize the market by focusing on the dignity of the individuals and the common good and stewardship. The Pope said he took St. Francis' name because he's a man who talked about the poor and peace and the creation itself. The poor and vulnerable and peace and the creation are values often missing in places of power like Washington, D.C. And that's why his voice is so important right now.
All right, gentlemen. Thanks very much. And Mr. Wallis has a new book out called On God's Side. Next on the rundown, it'll be Christie versus